Hello, welcome to episode 2 of the Majetone Drum Odyssey with me, your host, James. So today we're going to be talking about decoupling. We've all come across the idea of transference and acoustic energy transference, especially those of us that have lived in a city. You've got a next door neighbour, your upstairs neighbours, and that sound has just been amplified and transmitted through the walls, through the floor, and it sounds like they're in the same room. I'm sure we've all experienced that. I know I have. When it comes to studio design, often we'll use a room within a room type construction where we're looking to decouple that room and keep the sound contained within that room. That's a really important part of soundproofing. When it comes to floor toms, so this was shown to me when I was an assistant. I was assisting an amazing producer called Jimmy Hogarth, and he showed me this trick, and it changed my life, because at the time, I've always used old drums. Like the Drummers World drum that I've used in these experiments, I think is the only time I've ever bought a new kit. So I've had like old Ludwigs, old Gretches, loads of old Gretches, Slingerlands, stuff like that. And often like the floor tom legs on those will be absolute shite. And Jimmy showed me this on his Heyman drum, and it was just like, oh my god. So anyway, in this video, this is a bit of a kind of two-parter within the series. In this video, we're going to look at just the Drummers World, and then in next week's video, I'm going to dive in, and I did a bunch of tests with a few different vintage floor toms. This video is sponsored by me, Majetone. Head to majetone.com to check out drum samples. I'm really into this stuff. I want to make the best samples possible, which is why I got into this situation of fiddling around with drums and, diving down the rabbit hole. So head to majetone.com now and check out the samples that I've got there. I've got more stuff coming as well. But anyway, back to the video. The reason why this decoupling works is because sound, like myself, is inherently lazy. So it finds the path of least resistance. So by putting something that is denser underneath the floor tom legs, the sound is travelling down the floor tom legs, but it's trying to find the easiest way to continue going. If we place something that is really dense at the bottom of the floor tom legs, it can't travel through. So it goes back up the floor tom legs and remains in the drum. That happens the same in studio design as well. When we create a room within a room, the sound is looking for the easiest path of transference. Hockey pucks, I want to see what they do to the sustain of the drum and the decay of the drum. Someone on Instagram recommended I try these, which are washing machine anti-vibration pads, and I actually really like how these have got like indentations, but they're not as weighty as the hockey pucks. One of the criticisms that I've had of this is that it's the bearing edges, the head isn't seated correctly. It's not the bearing edge. Smooth bearing edge, made in 2005, Keller maple shell, by a drum shop in New York called Drummers World. It's an 8-ply Keller maple shell. It's a dual 45 edge. I used books for the longest time, and then I was getting an album that I mixed, mastered by Guy Davey, and Guy suggested, we were talking about studio monitors, and he suggested using hockey pucks to put your monitors on to decouple them, and I thought, well, I'll try it with floor toms. Tried it with floor toms, loved it. last week we looked at the wood hoops and the triple flange hoops, and we went through how I'm measuring this. Now all of the changes are going to be with the same tuning. The only thing that is changing is going to be the treatments on the drum, so the tension is going to remain consistent. If I bring up the triple flange hoop, this is our control. Over here on the spreadsheet, that we've got a rounded average of sustain of 2,669 milliseconds. It was noticed as well last week that the major change was this difference at 2.6K of 10 dB. What am I expecting to happen with the hockey pucks? Well, I know there's going to be a difference because I can physically hear a difference, but exactly what that difference is what we're going to be looking at. The hockey puck is in blue, and you can see that the frequency, it remains consistent. There's a little bit of a difference happening in here in the sort of low mids area, where that sustain is a little bit more even, like an even sort of tailing off of that. And we can see that as we go into the whole full range of things. You see how just about here there's a little bit more. You can see that's the same thing coming in, and there's just a little bit more sustain going on sort of throughout the whole drum. What's really interesting here is the decay of the hockey pucks. That with the hockey pucks, we've got a rounded average between all of the mics of 2,923, which is a difference from the triple flange control of plus 254 milliseconds. So a 10% increase in sustain. Frequency response, you can see that it's largely the same. It's not changing the tuning or the sound of the drum. So this sort of proves my point that I'm talking about, that this is not to do with the tuning, it's not to do with the heads, it's not to do with the bearing edges. It is something else entirely. But one of the things I did find really interesting here was, look, 2.69K. There's a dip there, which, if you remember rightly from last week, almost identical with what the wood hoops were doing. Now, the difference between wood hoops and the hockey pucks is enormous. I mean, it's like a 20% difference. Like half a second difference in sustain. Annoyingly, because I wanted to make this sort of universal, I didn't test the wood hoops with the hockey pucks, because frankly, there's so many variables that are just going on, you know, oh, but what if you tried it with this? What if you tried it with that? Yeah, didn't do that. Anyway, back to this. So, we've got an increased sustain and slightly less of that high frequency, which I think is really interesting. We've got, yeah, like 9 and a bit dB difference at 2.69K. The amplitude is almost identical throughout, like it sustains at the same rate, it just continues on. On Instagram, somebody suggested that I try washing machine anti-vibration pads. So these washing machine anti-vibration floor mats. So they've got like a little kind of indentation for the feet to go in. But the thing I was discounting them on was that they are so much lighter than the hockey pucks. And so I was coming into this with a bias of like, I'll try them out, but I think the hockey pucks would be better. But I was expecting them to be kind of the same as hockey pucks. Like, I was like, how much different can they be? And yeah, I mean, let's check it out. I don't know if I'm tricking myself and I'm going to wait until I get home and I can properly and accurately address this, but that feels like that just goes on forever. triple flange and the ISO pad. So we can see in the low frequency waterfall that there is just a touch more amplitude, more sustained, like the amplitude is way more powerful in that low frequency fundamental at 77 Hertz. We get more mid-range, we get much more sustain happening around here at like, what's that, like 150 Hertz. And it's also, it's not decaying as quickly, like it's sort of sustaining on and being more of a solid note, which I guess that this would be the first harmonic, like the first resonance that's happening. So it's just giving us more of that first resonance, which shows that there's not cancellation happening. If we look across the whole spectrum, we can see that just the amplitude of that washing machine pad is more powerful. Now this is where it gets, for me, surprising. We can see in the envelope time curve, the yellow one is the triple flange, and you can see how that decays off to 2.6 seconds. Whereas the washing machine ISO puck, or isolate anti-vibe pad, goes on for 4,044 milliseconds, so just over 4 seconds, which is insane. Obviously that's not the whole like note, it's not like a sort of synth, that's the decay time of that note. I did have somebody comment that what's the point of this, like why would you want a floor tom to sustain? And my answer to that is that it's better to have this to control it than to not have it and try to put it into the drum after the fact. Now, the really interesting thing for me was the difference between the hockey puck and the washing machine anti-vibration pad. I thought they were going to both be the same, and this does throw up a lot of questions of like, well, what about all the other things like the TNR booty shakers, the Pearl anti-vibration floor tom things, Gibraltar make one as well. I didn't try books because I just moved over to hockey pucks and I just assumed they were doing the same thing. And this for me has been the real benefit of doing these tests. So we've got, in the dark blue, we've got the hockey pucks, and we can see that that amplitude in the decay starts dying off around the half a second mark, whereas with the washing machine anti-vibe pads, they just carry on. It just carries on at like a really strong amplitude. See that in the envelope time curve down here, that it's more powerful. We could see the upper mids are more powerful as well. And I did nothing to change this. It's exactly the same height, it's the same position. I hit the floor tom, this has all been normalised, so there's no difference there. The frequency response of the two examples, the hockey puck and the washing machine ISO pads, is essentially identical. Like there's no real major differences between the two. There's a couple more, 5 dB more here at, what's that, 2K, but largely pretty negligible differences of a few dB, which I think is really interesting. Whereas if we do the triple flange versus this, triple flange is in yellow. Our biggest difference is again around that 2.7K mark, where we've got a 6 dB difference, and you can see that there just isn't the same amplitude between just the drum itself, the triple flange that's just on the floor, and the washing machine anti-vibration pads. The top end is smoother, the mid-range is smoother, like it's just a more consistent floor tom sound. Look at all three of them together. We can see that, yeah, essentially decoupling the floor tom results in a smoother frequency response from the drum. So now I've got the most out of the drum, and I can then take that and I can do whatever I want. I can apply muffling to it if I want that sustain to shorten. I can apply EQ to it and remove frequencies if I don't want them. Oftentimes with floor toms I tend to pull a little bit of 300 out. So getting that really consistent floor tom sound at source, for me, is the most important thing. And that's, to me, where this technique just wins. It's really easy to do. The washing machine anti-vibration pads I'm going to use on every single session. I do from now. They're amazing. They cost £8. I've linked them below. I've also linked the hockey pucks, should you want to get those. It's incredible. I mean, look at this. Look at the amplitude on that sustain. It's so much more, you know, and you can hear it. I mean, I said it in the video, you can feel the difference. So far in our experiments, we've done the wood hoops, and we found that they had a decreased sustain of 9%. We're working on our control of 2,669 milliseconds, which is our triple flange, and the wood hoops had minus 242 difference. The hockey pucks increased sustain on the triple flange by 254 milliseconds, giving us an increased sustain of 10%. The washing machine ISO pucks, and this one I went back and forth on because I was like, that can't be right, that's mad. It's right. So we had a rounded average of 4,044, which gave us a difference of 1,375 milliseconds, an increase in sustain of 152%. It's mad. Totally mad. I didn't think it would be that much. Next week, I'm going to return, again talking about decoupling, but we're going to look at some vintage drums. Thanks very much for watching. See you in the next video.